Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Kurt Sander, and this is Music Theory Simplified. Today's topic is a very important one because it forms the basis for much of what students do in their music theory classes, which is part writing. What we're going to look at today is something we call in music counterpoint. The word counterpoint comes from the Latin punctis contra punctum, which is point against point or note against note. And that's exactly what happens in counterpoint. Some have called it the art of combining melodies. So what is this counterpoint? Let's take a look. Throughout the world, the number of books on counterpoint could fill a small library, and each one is slightly different. But they all focus on the controlled use of consonance and dissonance when you combine two or more melodic ideas. All great composers studied counterpoint. Beethoven studied counterpoint, Mozart before him studied counterpoint, and of course Bach was known for his excellent counterpoint. But the study of counterpoint actually began when people first started singing two different parts at the same time. Music prior to the 12th century was what we call monophonic or single-line chant. But as more voices were added to this chant line, a system was needed to keep it all sounding good. This is the birth of counterpoint. Today, so much of our music is focused on chords, or the vertical element, but counterpoint takes into account how things move horizontally throughout time. Here's a brief counterpoint exercise. Notice how the two lines are very independent, moving in contrary motion, yet we also take into account the intervals that are created when those notes meet. The counterpoint we're going to be looking at is something we call species counterpoint. Now, species counterpoint is actually a pedagogical tool that was developed to teach young musicians how to write in a linear style or a 16th century Renaissance style. Now, that's really not the goal of why we study it. Why we study it is because what we know about tonal music comes from this tradition of Renaissance style counterpoint and how voices are layered on top of each other, and at points where they connect, they create either consonance or dissonance. And it's this consonance and dissonance that propels the line forward. And it really does carry over into everything that we do when we look at four-part chorale style voice leading. We're only going to be looking at first species in this lesson, but there are actually 5 total species. The key here is to keep in mind all the rules that govern the use of dissonance and consonance within 2 or more melodic lines. So let's get started. We begin with something called the cantus firmus, or fixed voice. This was often taken from an existing chant line. The goal of species counterpoint is to take this cantus firmus and to write a good counterpoint above or below it. But before we can do that, we have to learn the rules on writing a cantus firmus of our own. Remember, a cantus firmus is a vocal line, so we want to keep primarily what we call conjunct motion, which is stepwise motion. We want to begin and end on the tonic, and at the end we want to end with stepwise motion. All melodies should have a focus point. If it's a high point, we call it a zenith. Let's listen to this melody. That's a nice melody, but let's look at another one. Here the focal point is a low note, which we call the nadir. That works as well. Note that we have stepwise motion to the tonic, but in this case, since we're in minor, we want to raise that leading tone. Let's take a listen to this one too. So you see, both of these melodies have a focal point. They begin and end on the tonic and end with stepwise motion. If it's in major or minor, it's by half step below or whole step above. Now let's look at the rules for writing a good melody. Good melodies use mostly conjunct motion and avoid leaps larger than a minor sixth. The second rule for writing good melodies is to avoid writing multiple skips in succession. Too many skips break up the singability of the line. And as we mentioned before, you should begin and end with the tonic. And at the end of the melody, we should either see a 2-to-1 scale degree or a 7-to-1 scale degree. And if we're minor, make sure to raise the leading tone. Rule number 5, no melodic augmented or diminished intervals. You can see here we have an augmented fourth between the F and the B. And here we have an augmented second between the B flat and the C sharp. Now it's your turn to do some error detection. I'm going to show you a cantus firmus melody that has at least 2 errors. Your job is to find these errors. Push pause until you've found those 2 errors, and then push play to see the answer. Hopefully you were able to see how much this line skips around. It's not conjunct at all. And maybe you caught that augmented fourth in the melody. Okay, now let's actually get into writing counterpoint. We're going to start with first species, which is the easiest. Basically, we're given a line, and for that cantus firmus line, we will write 1 note of counterpoint for every note that we're given. All notes must be consonances with that cantus firmus melody. Now you might be wondering, what is a consonant note? Well, a consonant note creates an interval of a unison, an octave, or a fifth. These are perfect intervals, or imperfect intervals of a third and sixth. These are all consonant. Intervals that are not allowed in first species are dissonant intervals. The fourth, the diminished fifth, the augmented fourth, and of course, the second and the seventh. Let's start with a cantus firmus line and take a listen to how it conforms to what we've just learned. So first species simply adds a line above or below using all consonant intervals. Here's what this sounds like. That sounds pretty good, but what about writing below the cantus firmus line? Let's take a look at the rules for first species counterpoint. To begin, we either begin on an octave above or below the note, or a perfect fifth above. As we mentioned, all the intervals have to be consonant intervals. In writing intervals, we need to avoid leaping in both voices to a unison octave or fifth. Here you can see we have fifths and a unison, and we've approached them by step in at least one of the voices. And always avoid parallel unisons, octaves, and fifths. Now let's take a closer look at these 2 rules. Here are 2 motions, one to a perfect fifth, one to a perfect octave. They're both okay because we're approaching by step. But you can see in these examples, the first we approach by leap, and the second by parallel motion. Both of these are considered poor. Rule number 5 says that if we're using intervals, we should not use more than 3 in a row, because they lose the sense of independence then. So you can see in this first example, we're okay, we have 3/6. And the second example, we have 4/3, which is poor. And this brings us to our final rule, rule number 6. It has to do with endings. When ending a first species, you need to end with either ending A, which has an ascending minor second in the upper voice and a descending major second in the lower voice, moving to an octave, or ending B, which converges on a unison, the lower voice moving by minor second and the upper voice moving down by major second. Here's another example of an ending in a major key. Note the half step in the upper voice and the whole step major second in the lower voice. This makes it an ending A. Also in F major, we have a whole step moving down and a half step moving up. This is an example of ending B. Which one you use will depend on what your cantus firmus is doing. Okay, now it's your turn. I'm going to show you a really bad species counterpoint example, and your job is to find the 4 errors that are in this example. Push pause, and then when you found them, push play again. Let's take a listen first. Okay, push pause and go through the rules and see if you can find 4 errors. When you're ready, push play. Okay, quite a few errors. First of all, the parallel fifths at the beginning, this dissonant 7th interval, the parallel octaves, and then the improper ending. Push pause and make sure that you got these. And as always with these videos, the end comes way too soon. But don't worry, there are other videos where we start to look at second species counterpoint as well. For now, this is Dr. Sander reminding you, as always, especially in counterpoint, keep it simple. Take care. So that's the main takeaway from this lesson, and to be able to know how to write that cadential 6/4 closure, which emphasizes this idea of stretching out the dominant. Well, that's all the time we have for today's lesson, and this is Dr. Sander always reminding you to keep it simple.